Hey everybody, once again this is Andrew Powell from OST. Welcome to the webinar. We're going to get started in just another minute. We'll give the rest of our attendees a chance to join and then we'll dive right in. You should be looking at a screen that says Turn Legacy Applications into Modern Technology. That's our topic for today. And as I said, we'll get started in just a moment. Hello everyone and welcome to the webinar. The voice you're hearing right now is Andrew Powell. We'll do some introductions in just a moment, but we're just about to get started. Also on the line with me is Quinn Lee. Quinn, you want to say hi and we'll make sure your audio is working?
Hi. Hope you guys can hear me.
Excellent, Quinn. I can hear you, so I trust if I can hear you, they can too. Before we get started, just a couple of things I want to make sure I mention to our attendees. Number one, this webinar is being recorded, so if you have use for the recording, would like to watch it again or want to share it with someone who was not able to attend, feel free to reach out to us, reach out to OST or specifically to Danielle, who's been in contact with you coordinating the webinar, and she will provide you with a link so that you can watch the webinar at your leisure. Watch it again and again. Number two, if you've got questions while we're presenting, if you've got specific questions you want us to follow up on or are looking for more information on any of the topics that Quinn and I will be talking about today, feel free to use the question box right in WebEx. Danielle's on the line and she'll be monitoring the question box so that she can make sure she alerts Quinn and I if something comes up that you want us to explore in more detail. There will be a time for questions toward the end, and we'll take care of your questions then as well. But as we're going, if you think of things you'd like us to answer or things you want more information about, feel free to jump in. Okay? All right, great. Let's get started. So today's webinar, we're going to spend the next 45 minutes talking about turning legacy applications into modern technology. And we've broken that down into the 5 Ds of app modernization. We'll get into that in just a minute, but let's start with some introductions. Quinn?
Hi, I'm Quinn Lee. I've been in IT for 12 years. I'm a principal consultant here at Open Systems Technologies. A couple of interesting facts about me. When I was in college at Eastern Michigan University, I was the president of the Computer Information Systems Club. And I'm not ashamed to admit this, but I did spend some time doing COBOL development. That was my first programming language. And I'm a mixed martial arts enthusiast. I like to watch, but I like to program more than I like to actually fight. So that's me.
COBOL. I remember a lot of COBOL development back in the pre-Y2K days. But that's because I'm old. I've been an IT consultant for 25 years. For all of my adult life, I've been an IT consultant. So that goes back to pre-Y2K. I remember my wife and her mother wanting to stock up on water before the turn of the century. Crazy time, 16 years ago. I've been at OST for 4 years. I have been in IT my whole adult life, but I actually went to college to be an English teacher. I'm an English education major, and in my free time I write novels for the adult audience. So there's that. You can tease me about that later. So we work for a company called OST, and if you haven't heard of who Open Systems Technologies or OST is, I think this slide speaks volumes about what OST is about. We're a design to data center IT services provider. We provide design services and application development services. We provide data analytics services and IoT consulting. We provide managed services and enterprise services, and we sell server-side hardware and network infrastructure. We provide end-to-end IT services. But what we really are is a company of a bunch of people who care about people. Our commitment is to our people. We believe in honoring our people first, our clients second, and we believe when we do that, the rest will fall into place. We care a great deal about delighting our clients, about serving with humility, and about embracing entrepreneurship and innovation. We also believe learning matters. So these are, I tell you this, and we put this slide into our presentation because these are some of the things that drive who OST is and what we're about. It's not what we're here today to talk about, but it helps you to understand who Quinn and I are and what drives us so that you can understand our perspective as we get into our next topic. So let me level set for a second. What is a legacy app? We put this picture of an old-timey phone in here because I think this is what most people think of as a legacy app. We bought the phone, we connected it to phone service, and the phone works. And most of us view that legacy app as sort of like a sunk cost, an investment we made a long time ago in something that still works. So long as that phone's on our wall and we've still got a dial tone, the phone's still going to work for us. That's one way to think of legacy apps, but I think a much better example for our legacy app conversation is to think of legacy apps like this. I'll give you a second to soak that in. That's a beautiful, beautiful piece of automotive engineering there. That's a 1953 Studebaker Land Cruiser. So this car runs. It's a fully working automobile, and it can be kept running forever. But for those of you who don't know, Studebaker mechanics are a niche mechanic. They're like the COBOL programmers of car repair. Studebaker mechanics are expensive. They're hard to find. And that's a car that's 65 years old. It needs care. It needs upkeep. Sure, it can be kept running. Sure, you can keep it shiny. But it's not cheap to do so. And when we talk about legacy apps, what Quinn and I are actually talking about is things just like this Studebaker that are in your organization or your enterprise today. They're applications that you spent a lot of money on some time ago and seem to continue to do the job, but at what cost? A tremendous cost to your IT teams, to your application teams, to your support teams, to your internal users, and sometimes to your customers. Keeping your legacy apps running is sometimes surprisingly more expensive than it is for you just to take a look at options for updating those legacy apps into some new and modern framework. So Quinn, let's talk a little bit about why you might modernize.
So there are many reasons why organizations may decide to modernize their applications. And some of these may be business drivers and other technical drivers that you can consider in your pursuit to modernize your organization's applications. So one is constrained or impeded innovation. Many companies can compete. They get their competitive advantage in their ability to innovate. And if you're stuck with an application that was built on an older platform that doesn't allow for some of the newer features because of technology limitations, and that holds you back and it limits your ability to compete in your marketplace. Another, as Andrew actually meant, is decline in skilled resources. So let's say you have maybe a SharePoint 2007 application that you're, or implementation that you're still supporting. Eventually it's going to get very tough to find skilled resources to help you support and enhance that SharePoint application, especially when there's the developers for SharePoint now are excited about Office 365 and later versions of SharePoint. So as time goes on, the resources that are available to help support you are going to decline more and more. Lack of integration. So today's applications are as integrated as ever. And without an application that supports the modern standards and protocols for interfacing with other applications, then it's going to be hard to keep up as you start to upgrade apps around this legacy application. And today's users expect a certain level of performance. So this one's actually a business driver. If you have, especially with some of our line of business applications, a company's bottom line may depend on the performance of certain applications. And if that application can't keep up with the needs of its users, then you definitely want to consider modernizing that application. I actually had an application that I was supporting, actually working on a modernization for, where one of the line of business applications that it integrated with depended on Internet Explorer 8. So it had an IE8 dependency. Because of that IE8 dependency, our team had to make sure that, and we're building at the time a cutting edge application built on a SPA framework designed for the latest browsers. But because of this dependency by this other application, we had to make sure it was also compatible with IE8, and that added a significant amount of development time. So cost is going to be another concern that you have to consider, as well as the other risks that come with running an application on an outdated, unsupported browser or operating system that no longer gets security updates and no longer gets updated with the latest features. And also in that same lane there is performance. Older browsers don't deliver the same amount of performance as the latest versions of your IE8s and Chrome browsers.
Yeah, those are some great points, Quinn. That's excellent. I think as I was listening to you talk, the thing that I was suddenly reminded of is sometimes the cost is risk cost. When you talk about security risks, like you just were with IE8, I'm suddenly reminded we did some consulting for a company who had a phone system still being run by Windows 3.1.1, Windows for Workgroups, and their general opinion was it works. It's always worked. It sat in our closet and worked for 15 years. And that's true right up until the point that it stops working and shuts their business down or becomes compromised, and they have themselves in a real world of hurt. Sometimes the cost is a risk cost, and that's a great point you made, Quinn. Just one of those things you got to make sure you pay attention to. So let's walk through our agenda for today. Over the course of the next half hour or so, Quinn and I are going to touch on the 5 Ds of application modernization. And those 5 Ds we'll talk about in order are discovery, design, data migration, development, and then deployment and dry run. Oh, there's a bonus D there if you count dry run. Our goal here really is to walk you through the 5 steps, the 5 big Ds you'll need to tackle to get yourself from a legacy app into a modernized solution. So the first couple minutes we spent talking about some reasons why you might want to modernize. From this point forward, Quinn and I are going to assume you've got an app and you want to modernize it. And we're going to talk through the sort of things you need to pay attention to, you need to consider, and you need to work through as you work your way to modernization. Okay? Great. Let's dive right into discovery. So what do you need to know before you can start? There are really 4 primary steps to the discovery process, and I want to talk through each of these and how they relate to each other. So the first thing you need to do is make an assessment of your original application. And the goal here is to make sure you understand what it does for the user, what the user experience is, but also what it does for your business. How does that original application integrate to existing business solutions? How does it relate to your manufacturing or distribution processes? How does it integrate with your sales or customer service experiences? How does it deliver value for your business? Understanding that assessment, what purpose the original application serves, helps you to understand where your levers are as you plan out what your new solution looks like. You should also review your current backlog of work. So for most legacy applications, for most applications in general, inside of most enterprises, you've got a list of things you want to fix about that application. Maybe new features you want to add around the backlog. Maybe bugs that haven't been addressed because they're modest or low impact bugs. Maybe there are things on your backlog like adding reporting or adding additional functionality. You want to make sure you understand what those items are and how those items are ranked, so you have a feel not just for what your app currently does, but for what your users are telling you they need the application to do. And that brings us to number 3. You'll want to make sure you interview your users and your stakeholders to get a feel for how the application is used and what they see as the evolving change, the evolving impact that application has on the business. How are their needs changing over time? And how are the things they see in their future going to be impacted by the way they use the application? Now, after you've reviewed the current application, reviewed your backlog, and talked to your users, there's one more important group you should fold into the conversation. You should make sure you're talking to your internal IT and support teams. Your support teams have perspective on what works and doesn't, where your failure points are, and what things you need to be aware of. And your IT team has some information on how the application sits in your environment and what your migration paths and options will look like. We talk a lot about what we have and what we want, and the real trick to application modernization, the real thing you want to get out of your discovery, is trying to figure out where that nexus is, where you meet what you had against what you want to create what you need. Your new application might not be a Studebaker. Studebaker might have been the dream car that was perfect for your business when you bought the Studebaker or built the Studebaker. But maybe what you loved about it, the roominess of the interior, the performance of the engine, can be better handled in a different way. Or maybe the needs you face today are about fuel economy, not about roomy interior and high performance. And maybe the decisions you'll make about what you need today are influenced by what you want, not by what you had. Everybody doesn't replace their station wagon or their minivan with another station wagon or minivan. They replace their station wagon or minivan with the car they need now. And the purpose of that discovery analysis is to highlight for you and for your stakeholders and for your customers, not just what they have, not just what they want, but the solution that they need. Quinn, why don't you talk to us a little bit about design?
Andrew, I think that the point that you just made about interviewing users is a really good one, and I want to stress that. Sometimes you may start out on a path of could be feature parity, just recreating the existing features in the new application, but then somewhere along that journey you discover that what you had is not actually what you want, and then that takes you on a different path that's going to be tailored around the future design and getting to the points where you have exactly what the company is going after and what meets their current goals instead of what met their goals 10 or 12 years ago.
Absolutely. All right, Quinn, you want to talk to us a little bit about design, which when you complete the discovery, you head into this design phase. Talk to us about that.
Right, so now we're in the design phase. And the important thing to identify here is exactly what you want to pull forward. And just because you're pulling certain features forward from the existing legacy application doesn't mean you have to pull that design forward. Many applications that were designed years ago were not architected the way that we would design an application in today's world. A lot of those applications were built on a very monolithic architecture instead of being modular, and that causes a lot of things. It causes a slowdown in release cycles, because when you deploy an application like that, even if you're just updating one single feature, you have to redeploy the entire application. It affects your so release cycles. It creates the need to redeploy the entire application. It affects the way that you test the application. So you really want to take a step back, and what I like to do is take an API first approach and actually take the features that were in that the existing application and logically separate them into different domains and create APIs around those domains. Now that opens your IP up that was in that, locked down by that previous application, and makes it available to other applications in your organization, as well as this application's business. So that's one approach. There are many different approaches, and you have to go with the one that works best for you. The other consideration is the design for scalability. In today's world, there's so many ways to host an application and to horizontally scale that up. With our legacy applications, I know the way they were built, they were designed to be scaled more vertically, whereas we would add more resources to an individual server. Whereas in today's world, the way we design applications and the way that we host them is to only use the minimum resources required to host that application on a server. And then we have the ability to scale that application out infinitely across multiple servers. So we also want to design our user experiences for current standards. So today's users have very high standards when it comes to usability and performance. There are different methods for designing applications. There's the human-centered design approach. There's the mobile-first approach. So these different approaches that we would use in today's world to meet today's requirements, today's expectations, we'll want to take for designing this new application. And the other thing to consider is we want to bring forward productivity. So as I mentioned, with line of business applications especially, users depend on some of the productivity features that may have been in the legacy application. So just because there are certain things in that legacy application that we definitely want to leave behind and not recreate, there may be other features, especially geared toward productivity, that we want to make sure we bring forward. And users will definitely recognize that quickly if you deliver an application, a new application that's slower than their old application, or not as user-friendly as their old application. So just because an application is newer doesn't mean it's going to be necessarily mean the design is better. So definitely pay close attention to design. The other thing is that there are several hosting options in today's world that may not have existed when the legacy application was created. So today we have on-premises hosting available for our production environment, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service. We also have software as a service available to us that I have to mention because maybe there's the option to use an existing an out-of-the-box or a SaaS offering to replace the existing application. So that's something to think about as well. These different hosting options are so important because they affect the way that we architect our systems. They affect the way that we design applications, especially if you decide to go with a platform as a service. And they affect the way that our applications are deployed and our deployment tools. From my experience, organizations are going with not just one of these four options, but typically it's a mix of all four options.
Excellent. So we did some discovery. We've tried to get our heads around the full scope of the application and the migration we think we want to make, the redesign we want to make. We've gotten into the details about how it's architected, what the user experience is like, and what the hosting is like. Let's talk a little bit about the data. So data migration on its surface seems like perhaps the simplest part of the process. We're going to create a new schema for our destination database or databases. We're going to create a data migration path, figure out how we get the data from source to destination, what that path looks like. We're going to test that migration to make sure our data moves correctly, and we're going to validate the data on the other side, and make sure what we've got in our destination schema matches what we expected in our old system. On its surface, it's just data. It seems pretty straightforward, but there's so much more to the data migration piece when you're talking about application modernization. Are you going to run 2 operating systems simultaneously? Are we going to have live data in our source system and in our destination system? How are we going to cut over to ensure we don't have data loss? Depending on the application and the way the application is used in your environment, there might not be a clean cutover. There might be repeated synchronizations across time. And that's in your best case. In your worst case, you might discover that you need to fall back onto your old system as you launch your new system. Something you hadn't accounted for or didn't expect comes into play, and you need to address it. You've got to think through those things as you're figuring out how to manage your data, because in many cases, that data is the lifeblood of your organization. Making sure your data is cared for, both in the way you store it and in the way you move it, is essential to your ability to carry out the project the way you actually want your migration to occur. Oops, I went the wrong way. Just to try and take a step back and look at this a little more broadly. Here's a planning graphic I'm sure some of you have seen before, and that is, at the very least, we have to have a plan. We've got to say, here's how we get from our starting point to the finish line. But we also need to plan for the reality that is along the way we're going to discover some rocks and some crevices and some water obstacles and some storms that we weren't initially accounting for. And our data migration plan, but indeed all of our planning, has to take into account some frame of reference we can use to enable us to account for the unexpected in a way that preserves our customers' ability to do their jobs and preserves our users' ability to do their jobs, and most importantly, preserves the underlying data that powers our information, our systems, our employees, our environments, and our operations. Now, that's a pretty broad answer because we're talking about application modernization without a specific frame of reference. Maybe the application you want to modernize is specifically tailored to one business unit. Odds are good the modernization of that application still has far-reaching implications across your organization. And thinking through those details as a part of your data migration plan helps you to make sure in the end you get what you need, not just what you had. And you get all of your data, not just the portions of your data you grabbed when you started your migration. So we've got our discovery complete. We've done some design work to figure out what our experience will be like and how we're going to build it. We've figured out how to manage our data and how to move our data from our source to our destination, and figured out how we're going to store it at the destination. Sounds to me, Quinn, like we're ready to build something.
I think we are. So as we start to develop our new application, one of the things that I like to do as we move along in this process is to go back and iteratively look at the original code if that code is available to us. This gives us an idea of what the integration points are, exactly what the integration points are. If there are edge cases in our business logic that may not have been exposed in those original software requirements, we can identify those in our source code from the existing application. And it also helps us to estimate scale for each feature that we're implementing. So oftentimes we may think, estimate that a certain feature is going to take a certain amount of effort to develop, but it turns out after we start to dig into it, then it's going to take a much bigger effort. Well, with that existing source code, that can give us some insights into how big and how complex an individual feature is going to be to deliver. So also, if we're working iteratively, what we typically do on project teams where we're modernizing an application is to revisit and groom our requirements. So this will go hand in hand with revisiting those original requirements and that original source code. And also, one of the things that I like to do is go back and speak with the stakeholders and the users about the progress of the application. make sure that you're steering the application in the right direction and that you're moving it forward and not just recreating what was there before. So the idea is to create new features and functionality that are enhancements over what was in the existing application, not just recreate them. And we definitely don't want to take a step back, and getting that user feedback, again, is so important, because those users who are in that application every day will definitely have a good sense of what direction you're taking the rewrite of the application. And the last step here is to educate. So you definitely, one of the things that I do when I'm on a project team is to go back and talk about the new application. Sometimes it's through just putting together the documentation for the new application. Other times it's more of a formal setting, where it's sort of like a classroom setting where we can teach the users about the new features, how to access everything. That way they're very comfortable, and it's helps you to navigate some of the pushback you may receive from users that have grown very used to using that legacy application.
Oh my gosh, that's such a great point, because part of the struggle isn't just solving for your business need or creating the solution you need. It's also making sure your users understand how to use the new application. Such a great point, Quinn. I think we've all experienced that before, that change is hard for a lot of us, myself included. And sometimes, even though the new process is better, faster, more performant, better for the business, better for the customer, better for me, the simple fact that it's different can get me hung up, can make it hard for me to understand what to do, how to do it, and what to do next.
Yeah, you definitely want to make sure that your rewrite is well received within the organization. So anything that you can do to get ahead of it and make sure that users are going to, first off, understand it, are familiar with the new features that are going to roll out, and also understand the advantages to using the newer version of the application is going to be beneficial to you.
Yep. Such a great point. Okay, so we've got our application built. Now it's time for us to deploy it. And hey, I want to talk for a second as I move into the deployment step. I want to talk for a second and say we've presented these 5 steps linearly, but anyone on the phone who has any experience with OST's application development practices, or really with modern agile development in general, knows that probably the way you're going to do this in your business is less linear than we presented it. You aren't going to build your whole new solution in a vacuum without anyone seeing it and then go throw it into production at the last minute. We'd expect you're going to use concepts like continuous integration and continuous deployment. Try and give yourself an initial product that you continue to evolve over time. And so when we talk about deployment, we're really talking more about dry run, about trying to do the things you need to do to make sure that your solution in the end accomplishes the things you set out to build the solution to do. And we really break down deployment and dry run into 5 specific call-outs. I'll talk through each of those. So we've got to have a way to deploy and monitor the application. We've got to know that it's up and running and working and performant the way we expected it to. So this monitoring is as much about measurement. Does it do the things we said it would do? In its deployed state, does it solve for the challenges we expect it to solve for? And does it truly eliminate the source application it's replacing the way we expected it to? There's no point going through all this work, making this investment, investing this time and money in modernization of an application if we aren't going to take the time to ensure it's working the way we expect it to. We also want to make sure we're validating our continuous improvement and continuous deployment pipeline. We want to make sure that CI/CD pipeline works so that as we continue to make this application better, as we add new features, update frameworks, increase performance, increase scalability, we have an environment that enables us to rapidly deploy that to our users. If you're building new applications, if you're building modern applications and you aren't thinking about CI/CD, you should be. So absolutely, as you're working through how you modernize an application, you should be thinking about CI/CD as well. Then step number 3, I say test, test, test. And the reason I write test 3 times is because you want to make sure you're doing your testing every step of the way. As you're developing, you're doing unit tests and validating that the application works the way you expect it to. And then you're probably going to have a whole suite of tests you run, performance, scalability, and deployment tests when you put it into your user's hands. Beyond that, you're going to have some user acceptance testing too. You can build the most perfect application in the world that solves for the problems exactly the way you expected it to. And if in the end your users don't think it does what they thought they wanted it to do, you've still got a challenge. So all 3 kinds of testing, your unit testing, your application framework and scalability testing, and your user acceptance testing, all 3 of those are critical. And that's the real reason I wrote test 3 times. Now, item number 4 on the list is also test, because this is the point where I drive home that you can't ever test enough. We as developers, I've grown out of a software development background, as has Quinn. We as developers tend to test the application the way we expect the application to work. And that's one kind of testing that's valid. We also want to make sure we have automated unit testing. They're tests that are testing to ensure the outcomes are the outcomes we expect. You've got to take testing seriously. So much so that I put it on 2 separate lines. And then also, if you're doing your job right, you're going to be gathering feedback from your users. You didn't hit a home run your first time up the bat. You're going to find things in the application that even if you gave the user exactly what you understood to be what the user's needs, you're going to find things that evolve over time, things that could be made better, things that could be enhanced, could become more performant, could be created in a way that makes them more excellent for the user and the user's experience. That feedback is critical. That feedback enables us to do our jobs in the application development space. If we aren't hearing from the people who are actually owning the application, who have a stake in it, and are using it every day, then we're missing the boat. I brought along a picture that I love because this is how I always think of the importance of testing and feedback in the application development lifecycle. Our teams of developers are often just on the left-hand side of the screen. They're just seeing the 4 boards stacked up there, and they're willing to defend to the core of their being that there are 4 boards there because everything they see tells them this is exactly what they're seeing. And the tester, and sometimes even the users on the other side, they just see the 3 boards, and they're both right because the application both has a user face that faces the users and all of that code behind it that determines what we do. And it's only when you take a step back and look at the whole picture that you can actually see what's going on. I like to cover the screen and say how many boards are there on the left side and the right side because it's a reminder that sometimes both people are right even though the information contradicts each other. So Quinn, why don't you talk us through sort of how you put all this together into a way that makes sense?
So reasons to modernize. We talked about several reasons that an organization may want to modernize their legacy applications. Some of those reasons will be business-driven, others technology-driven. The discovery phase, where we take a look at why we're modernizing and what's our way forward to achieve a successful modernization. We discussed design, what to consider when designing the new application so that we ensure that this new application is going to be head and shoulders above our legacy app in terms of performance, scalability, and many other considerations. We also discussed development. So our development strategies today may be a lot different from what they were when our legacy applications were developed. So we want to make sure that we're bringing forward the critical features in our application, not redeveloping features that maybe no longer used or could be developed a much better way, or the feature could be improved upon greatly, and ensuring that we're iterating with our users and our stakeholders to keep us on the right path. And then we talked about deployment, which Andrew just wrapped up, where we want to make sure that we validate our CI/CD pipeline. which is, from my experience, a critical step, especially for organizations that may be implementing a hybrid environment or a multi-cloud environment. You definitely want to make sure that you have a seamless CI/CD pipeline for deploying to individual hosting platforms.
Great. So what I want to do now is open the floor up and see if we can't get a little bit more interactive. If you've got some questions, if there are things you're wondering about and want to talk through a little bit about where you are in the pipeline and what your challenges are, Quinn and I would love to address your questions and talk a little more openly about what you're challenged with as you look at your applications and how you might modernize them. Danielle, I think we've got questions enabled in the webinar. So if you go to the question section inside of your WebEx, you can post a question that we'll all see and we'll be able to discuss for you. And Quinn, while we're seeing if our users have some questions they want to talk to us about, maybe if you want to walk through an example of a recent application modernization you've been tasked with, and give us some perspective for where your challenges were. I'm sure that would be helpful to our audience as well.
Sure. I've actually been a part of a few different application modernizations. One of those being an upgrade from a thick client or a rich client application, and so with this one, there was actually a technical driver that was kind of spurred this initiative. With a rich client, there had to be a lot of coordination involved to push out deployments onto each machine. And what the organization wanted was to be able to do a single deployment and reduce the cost of a deployment ultimately. So we went with a web application, which was replacing a Windows app in order to be able to push deployments out faster and not affect the users with downtime as much. And so we did a lot of the things we talked about here. Some of them were lessons learned. We actually started out on a path with that application of achieving feature parity. We got, maybe a quarter of the way through the application and decided we needed to take a step back and just sit with our users for a couple of hours a day and just, visually observe how they use the application. When they're not too busy, ask them some questions. And what we discovered, and this is a step that we should have taken much early on, was that there were pain points in the existing application that were in our backlog. We were going to recreate the same pain points. And so that was a good point of to learn from, and something that we were able to navigate around and avoid because we took that extra time to actually sit with the users.
No, that's great. I think what you just touched on, Quinn, is something that I've struggled with in a couple of cases with application modernization projects, and that is that the general instinct of the users is to rebuild exactly what they've got right now. It's the process that they're familiar with. It's the application that they already know how to work with, and they aren't thinking through where are our pain points. Is this an opportunity to fix those? They're thinking through how am I going to be able to do what it is I'm trying to do in this new application. I need it to work the same. That's how you get things that look like old school green screen applications and running in Windows XP or running in Windows 7. It's an attempt to try and recreate the exact experience instead of look more holistically at the experience we want instead of the experience we've always had.
That's right. Another thing to keep an eye out for, and this goes double for line of business applications, are productivity features. Things like the ability to navigate without using a mouse, quick keys within the application. Yeah. These features can all be recreated for the web if you're developing a web application. So you have to be careful not to overlook those. because with line of business applications, the productivity affects the bottom line. So you have to be able to, at the very least, at the minimum, meet the performance of the existing application.
Yeah, that's great. Quinn, we just got a question from one of our attendees. I'll read the question and I'll let you respond first. Can you talk a little bit about tips on how to choose with users which features of a legacy app make MVP and how to do that? Legacy apps often have lots of features built up over time. How do you trim those to the most important? And this is a great question that sort of builds off of what we were just talking about, Quinn, this notion that your application might do literally hundreds or thousands of things that have gotten built for specific user needs over time. It might not even make sense to put all of that into your new modernized application, but how do you choose which things you're going to do and which things you aren't going to do as a part of your initial release, your MVP?
That's a great question, and yeah, bringing forward all of the existing features may bloat the new application. So some of those features may be critical and some not so critical. And what you have to do with your users is determine what the critical path through the application is. Which features are those that they can't live without are going to be your features that make the MVP. And that's going to involve coordination. Like I kind of reiterated a few times, to actually talk to the users of the application, talk to the stakeholders as well as the users, to find out number one, what was the intention of the application? Why was it built in the first place? And how do you get, what work does it do? The function of an application is to do some type of work. What is that work? And when you can kind of distill down which features are actually needed to do that work, then you know what your critical path is. And the minimum viable for that application, minimum viable product, is going to be basically a collection of those critical features.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm going to build off of what you just said, Quinn, and talk a little bit about another challenge that you will absolutely face as you look at how to modernize a line of business applications within your business. And that is this notion that there are some things that aren't critical, but the user who uses them believes they are. And that's really one of the hardest parts of what we do as modernizers of legacy applications, because it might not be critical to the business. It might seem superficial to everyone else, but to that one guy or gal who has that functionality built into the application for their unique need, they're going to lose that feature. And there's no scenario where that's easy. Talking about why, talking about what the overall objectives of the modernization effort are, and talking about better ways, different ways, or new ways they can accomplish the same end result are absolutely worthwhile. But there's no doubt that there are some things that aren't going to make it into the MVP, and the fact that they don't make it into the MVP frustrates, hurts, or is difficult for at least one of your users to accept. And that's the reality of what we do. Sometimes we try so hard to deliver everything to everyone that we forget that we've got to start somewhere. And that's okay to start somewhere, to identify what the initial things we need are, and to build out that MVP, recognizing that user A might not get this one specific thing he wants, and recognizing that user B might never get this other thing that she wants. Calling those things out and saying, yes, yes, we're documenting these things you want, and here's how we determined what's going to be in our initial MVP. Some degree of transparency is essential to being able to mitigate that frustration that there is no doubt you will experience from some of your users as you modernize.
And that's also why it's important to have a product owner who can understand some of the cost benefit of adding each individual feature, actually. So when we look at that feature that's used 5% of the time by 5% of users, but it creates a decrease in performance by 25%, there may be someone in the organization that puts up a fight to keep that feature in the application, in the new application. but is it really worth it? And could it be handled a different way than it's handled in the current application? Maybe there's a different way that it could be implemented that is not embedded in the critical path of all users.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's a great point, Quinn. All right, do we have any, let me just take a look here. It doesn't look like I've got any other questions coming in through the webinar control panel. I want to make sure that that all of our attendees know that they can feel free to reach out to Danielle or reach out to Quinn or myself if you've got follow-up questions or have specific concerns that you'd like to talk one-on-one about or try and get some feedback or perspective on. Any one of the three of us would be happy to speak with you or have an email exchange with you separate from this webinar as well. And feel free to reach out to Danielle or to our marketing team if you want to try and arrange time for us to talk to you about how we might be able to help you put into perspective what it is you're trying to accomplish and what your next steps look like. If nobody's got anything else, then I'm just going to take a moment to say thank you and let Quinn do likewise. Thanks for spending your lunch hour with us, or for those of you who are one time zone away from Eastern, your pre-lunch hour with us. Talk a little bit about application modernization and how you create a process to move your legacy applications into the modern world. Thanks so much for your time and attention. I appreciate it. Quinn, you want to wrap us up?
Yeah, thank you for your time. Thanks for joining us for this this Lunch and Learn webinar. I appreciate the opportunity to get to talk about app modernization. It's something that I have a lot of experience in and something that I actually enjoy. So again, thank you.
Thanks so much. Feel free to, again, to reach out to Danielle if you'd like a recording or you have more questions or concerns.